Anita is a social psychologist and researcher who runs arts organization Soul Food Productions. She promotes spiritual arts in the mainstream community, and she now describes herself as a poet, senior researcher, and creative director. Salawat.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for coming out to listen to me this evening. I feel very, very privileged to see you all, and very excited to talk about this topic. So what I'm actually going to talk about to you this evening is a project that I did, a piece of research that I did for a museum in Cambridgeshire, Peterborough Museum, earlier in the year. And I hope you'll be as excited to learn about it as I am. The reason that this project was so exciting was it was an opportunity really for a local Muslim community to be displayed in an exhibition in a local museum, and we also did I designed an exhibition and a performance piece out of this research I did. The research is about it's about Muslim song in Peterborough, and I was very fortunate to be approached by Intangible Cultural Heritage, who are an organisation ECOMOS UK, who are an organisation who are funded generally by the Arts Council. And they did a project this year called Intangible Cultural Heritage, where they went around the UK and they spoke to different people about types of heritage that they felt were being lost in England. So it was everything from folk songs to basket weaving, to other sorts of strange things that we don't think about anymore, Celtic knot tying. But when they came locally to where I live in Peterborough, the museum said, well, actually, we've got this amazing diverse community. Peterborough's second biggest ethnic community is Pakistani Mirpuri, and East African Indian. We've got this amazing diverse community, and the Muslim community have been established in Peterborough now since the 70s. Yet we have nothing in the museum that represents them. So why do we not use this Intangible Cultural Heritage project to learn something about the Muslim community? And more than that, why don't we use it to bring more Muslims into the museum, to show that actually this is a place to document all of our histories. It's not just about white British history. This is about everybody's history. So it was under this guise that I was approached as a local, I do poetry locally, and I'm a researcher. So I was approached and with this sort of idea that we want to trace some form of intangible cultural heritage in the Muslim community in Peterborough. And the museum at that time were really, really interested in what's happening amongst women in Peterborough. Now, fortunately, Peterborough is a very culturally alive place. There's a very big, there are many Sufi tariqas, which bring their own arts, and those bridge the Shia and the Sunni communities. We have this real sort of vibrant love of poetry, of song, and litany. So I was not worried about this. I thought I'll be able to definitely find something that's going on. I myself sing weekly in Peterborough as part of a weekly Mawlid. So I really looked forward to the project. And what I'm going to talk to you about this evening is what I found when I started to speak to the artistic women, the singing women in Peterborough, about what the first generation brought back in the 70s, about what the second generation, who are my age, have done with music since, and what the third generation are doing. And they're the most exciting in the third generation because, as you'll see, they're really multi-talented musicians, and they're really establishing a choral tradition in a part of Cambridgeshire where choral tradition goes back centuries. So Peterborough Cathedral is one of the oldest cathedrals in the country and has one of the most established choirs. And down the road from us we have Cambridge, and Cambridge has many a choir to speak of, and developing Muslim choral scene. There is also Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, who himself writes Muslim hymns, and some of those are already being sung across the country in different choirs. So I'm going to tell you a bit of those stories tonight. And I said that I did an exhibition for the museum out of this. We also produced a performance. So I'm going to play to you a little bit of that performance tonight as well, so you can actually see some of this song in action. But what I'm most excited to do is just tell you a little bit about what was happening between each generation, which heritage was being passed on, and what new styles the Muslim community are adopting. Because Muslim song really is very exciting right now, and I think that it will develop as an area that really bridges the Muslim traditions and British choral traditions going back. It feels like there's a real revival happening through what Muslims have brought. In this case, I look specifically at South Asian communities. So in this case, from South Asia, although across the country you also see an influence from the Caribbean, from the Arab countries. So you'll see a bit of that come through as well. So this is where I get the direction wrong. Okay, great. So we've spoken about that. So first of all, back in April, I spoke to 24 different women in the area about song for them, and I split it over 3 generations. So I spoke to the women who came in the 1970s, mostly from the Mirpur region in Pakistan, and also from areas of East Africa. I spoke to women my own age who are either part of choirs or who are running choirs, and I spoke to young women at the local Muslim girls' school. So those were teenagers, and they actually helped me with some research. They did research themselves into their own families, which was brilliant. So I captured 3 generations of Muslim women who are singing. And we looked at the sort of questions I asked around was, what style are they singing in? What's the content of the songs? What are they singing about? And what instruments are they using? And also with each generation, I asked, what was retained from the generation before? What have you inherited? What have you adopted that's new? And is there anything that's dying? Are there any sort of parts of this heritage that we should be worried about losing? And what I found was really amazing, because actually there was this kind of amazing building of each generation on the last generation. And I ended up calling the project the Quivering Scale, and I shall show you why. So what I found when I spoke to the first generation was, when they came over here, they brought over Qawwali, and they brought over Geets. Now, the interesting thing about the Geets was that whilst these are being retained, the folk songs, around marriage and harvest and things like that, whilst these are being retained, they're being shortened because there's not really the occasion for them anymore. But the Qawwalis are alive and kicking, and we'll all know people probably like Atif Aslam and Abida Parveen who are still singing Qawwalis from centuries ago and keeping them alive in popular culture. So in the first generation, this was really spoken about quite a lot, was the Qawwali. And a number of the women in the community were passing on knowledge of the Indian raga scale to the next generation. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the raga, it's quite a complex scale, and it's emotion based. So it's you have ragas for happiness, and you have ragas for anger, and you have raga for nighttime and daytime. So the Indian scales are based around sort of times and emotions. And this is what was being taught to the next generation by the women of the first generation. And they were very, very proud of this. And I just thought that's amazing. I mean, I didn't know much about ragas before I started this research, apart from that they existed. And now the second generation, so they were inheriting these ragas, but they kind of had a bit of an identity crisis, trying to find their place in Britain. And this came out a lot in the interviews, was like, we feel a little bit lost, and we don't know what it is to be Muslim and British. And whilst we've inherited this wonderful music from our aunts, usually from an aunt or a mother, usually from an aunt in the interviews, it's great and it's beautiful, but we want something that helps us express ourselves as British Muslims. And a lot of these women had either themselves gone out to study in the Middle East as a result, or they knew people who had. So in Peterborough, there are many people who've gone out either to Fez, Damascus, or the Yemen to study. And those people, to find what they thought then was authentic Islam. We don't want the Pakistani Islam anymore. We don't want the Indian Islam, because we're not that culturally. We want our own. We're going to go to the Middle East and find authentic Islam. So many people did that, and they came back. But what they brought back with them was Arab Islam, right? So they realized that this also isn't our Islam, but there's a lot of beauty in it. And also they were sent back with litanies. So for example, one of the litanies they were sent back with is by Habib Umar. It's called the Shimmering Light Maulid. And this is sung weekly in Peterborough. That's one that Habib Umar wrote actually for a Western audience. And basically telling the people who brought it back, gather people around yourself weekly to sing this. And know that you need to establish your own British Islam. So they went out to find British Islam, and he sent them back to find it. We also have the Burda that's sung every month in several of the local mosques. There is the Dala'il Khairat, which has come back from Fez in Morocco. That is sung monthly. And another example is the Latafiyya, which is sung monthly. It's from the Shadali Tariqa in Jordan. So we have many of these litanies now sung monthly or weekly in Peterborough that operate in the Arab maqam. And what I found was really interesting when people talking about the scale this was sung in is that the Arab maqam that it's sung in is almost in the English alto. So it's the part of the choir that anyone can sing between a D and an A for people who are musical. It's a range that anyone in this room could sing. And so those songs are really designed to bring people together. It's not like the ragas, which are specialists. They need to be passed on to people who can sing them, who can play the instruments. They are gathering together songs. They are bringing people together songs. So this generation now, you have a number of specialist people who can sing in the Indian raga, and that tradition continues. But you have a lot of people who sing the Arab songs also in the Arab maqam. So already at my generation, there's this sort of developing sophistication in song, where there's an awareness of these two different modes of singing. But for me, the most interesting part of this research was when I spoke to my own generation about the younger generation, and indeed when I spoke to the younger generation. So the younger generation who were the subject of this, they were sort of the eldest, about 14, some of them as young as 7. And what happened with this generation was the people my age who are mums basically said, look, this was all good going out to the Middle East and trying to find ourselves, but we know we need to find ourselves here in England now. Maybe we should start exploring English music. Maybe we should have a choir. We've seen that the local cathedral has a very active choir, and they move around the country and they meet lots of people. Maybe a choir is the thing that builds bridges. So 2 choirs were established in Peterborough. One was at the girls' school where I sometimes work, so I sometimes help out with that choir. And one is at the mosque. One of the mosques, Masjid Khadija, has had a choir for about 2 years now, established by somebody my age. And really that was bearing in mind that they want the 3rd generation to be bridge builders. They want them to be able to go out and sing in the cathedral. They want them to be able to go out and do the choirs. So they have taught them. They really value what the 1st generation brought. So that generation have been taught the Indian raga. They've also been taught the Arab songs in that maqam that brings people together. But they're also learning the English scale with an English choir master. So they are amazing. And this is where this idea of calling the exhibition the Quivering Scale came in. Because the sophistication of that generation is quite amazing. They can sing in 3 different modes that not only work to make different sounds, but they have 3 different kind of methods behind them. So where the raga is very emotional, they're able to sing in a very emotive way. The maqam is about bringing people together, and also, you know, these Arab songs, all of these songs are in praise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions. The 3rd generation then have these English songs, which are really, most of these English hymns are designed to build bridges. They sing songs by people like Cat Stevens, Yusuf Islam, and by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. There's also an English Maulid now, written by a young woman who's 17, I believe, called Noor Yusuf. It's called The Soliloquy of the Full Moon. So they're learning these now English language, English scale pieces too. So we have very emotive song in one place, we have a gathering song in another place, and we have a bridge building song after that. And so when you hear all those songs together, and they often sing them as a fusion, it is just something wonderful and absolutely amazing. And this is where I get very excited, because this is where I feel that we really are building bridges. Another really interesting thing I found when I was doing the research with the third generation is that one of the young men who's in this choir is also in the Peterborough Cathedral choir. So he goes to the cathedral every day to sing in that choir, and then he comes to the mosque choir on a Sunday, and he really sings in the English style and teaches the others to do so. So I found that was really interesting. There was something that was being lost, which was the geet. So when I was speaking to the older generation, they said there just used to be so many occasions on which you could sing folk songs. When we went out to the harvest, we would sing the folk songs. When we came home and sat with our friends, we would sing the folk songs. People would be in and out of each other's houses, and it would give you, singing was like another way of speaking. It wasn't just, you didn't just sing geets at weddings. And when they came to England, there was a real shift in culture, which just meant there was no occasion for the folk song anymore. Everyone lived behind locked doors. So the songs about, going out and meeting people and seeing the children, they all disappeared. The weddings were shortened from 7 days to 3. So all the wedding songs have just been shortened, so much shorter now. And they also said that the arrival of Bollywood in their homes really affected the geet, because when they were in their villages, there was no TV, there was no radio in the 70s. But when they came here, you've got Bollywood straight in your front room. And what amazing songs you have in Bollywood about getting married and the Mendi and all that. So this was something I found was dying. And when I was asking people to try and recall the words, the full kind of lyrics to these geets, they just couldn't remember them. They said, we'll have to ask Auntie so-and-so, she might know, but we just don't sing them often enough anymore to know. They could remember maybe one refrain or two. So it was quite interesting to see, and that's something to be conscious of in preserving heritage too, because some of these songs have got amazing stories behind them, and you'll see in a minute in the performance that was done. You probably know from the geets, if you're familiar with geets, if you've heard, they can be quite funny and joyful, and they tell their own story. So that was interesting. But what was interesting as well about the geet is that whilst those are being shortened, the women are still playing the dolki, and that's a really, the dolki was an instrument that was brought from the small drum, which you can see in the picture there, which was brought over, and those are still really popular at weddings, although they're often played to Bollywood songs now. In the second generation, though, the dolki is retained by some women, but actually it's been replaced by the duff, which has come over, which is like the tambor, I think it's tambor in Urdu. It's become the instrument of choice. So when I look at the choir now, most of the people in the choir will play the duff, and that's become a real that's the standard instrument that you learn now. You don't really learn the dolki anymore. That's sort of a specialist number of people, but you definitely learn the duff. So it's kind of this Arabization is quite interesting, and the other interesting thing that's happening in the third generation that I think we'll see a bit more as choral song develops is that they are learning instruments now, and it's interesting because they always think they're doing it on the sly. So when they were saying to me, "Oh, I'm learning the piano, but I dare not play it," or I'm learning the violin, but I dare not play that. There's still a sort of worry about the judgment of playing a musical instrument, but a lot of the young people are learning, and that could be something quite interesting when watching the development of Muslim choral song, because I'm sure this isn't just the case in Peterborough. I know in Cambridge there's a lot less frowning upon instruments, and ergo more people do play instruments, but I've never seen it yet. I've never seen anything beyond the duff and the drum accompany Muslim song, except for in pop music, so people like Yusuf Islam who will accompany with a guitar. So that will be something that will be quite interesting to watch, and I found that the switch in instruments quite interesting in this. But I've spoken enough about what I find interesting. Would you like to see the performance that took place? Cool. I'm gonna apologise before I play this for my dodgy editing. So media people in here, Imran's not allowed to say anything. Excuse it when it suddenly goes onto a free screen. It's because I wasn't able to render all the film. But here is the performance that happened off the back of this research, which is about 8 minutes long. Okay.
So if you know what you can do and you don't know, you can just start to it. So for me, it was my mum and my auntie. So when I was growing up, I used to go to like a lot of weddings, and it's all I'd hear. Like my grandma would sing it, she was with babies. My mum's always singing it, like randomly I just hear them singing it. It's as far as I know, it's a love song. And the woman, she's calling her lover to come meet her on a bridge, but he never comes, and so she's left heartbroken. That in a minute. So that's an example of a folk song. And then we have Qawwali. You're going to sing a Qawwali. What's the difference between a Qawwali and the Eid?
So, like I said at the start, Eid is just folk song, everyone can join in. Qawwali is more is a professional type of singing. As you said at the beginning, it includes rap. So, rap is like, it's hard to explain, it's hard to understand what rap is because it's very detailed and very precise. Allahu, 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 कभी मेरा सफीना लिख दे ताज गाड़ी मुरम ताज गाड़ी मुरम ताज गाड़ी मुरम हम गरीबों के दिल की
person that you mentioned, and so we're finding outlets, and I mentioned that some of our parents and our teachers travel out to the Arab world and they brought back this music, and so we were a place where we didn't entirely relate to the Indian continent culture. Unfortunately, we didn't quite fit in exactly in our British culture. So we held on to our Muslim identity, thinking that's where we found our space, our belonging. And so when we heard about these social songs coming from our world, we wanted to take part. And so our local gathering started about 5-6 years ago.
so we set up it was a particular choir, and we wanted to set up the choir, not only did we want to feel like they were able to express themselves, but also to be able to go to the wider community and to be able to appeal to the wider community in the language that they recognise, the way that they recognise. The choir is part of the British culture, and I used to teach in school, we were part of the choir, and I grew up with the choir, and I wanted my children to have that experience as well. What do you find the different types of singing you know them? Which one do you prefer? Do you have a favourite? The Arabic one. The Arabic. Why do you prefer the Arabic? The Arabic one's down south. They are very far. So the English one's a bit slower. The Arabic is a bit slower. And what about you, Sahel? Which one do you prefer? Arabic or Urdu or English? I prefer Arabic.
So I mean that's probably all from me actually. I mean, this piece now is to conclude. It's an exhibition in the museum, which is really great. I mean, I was so happy that the museum approached us to have something about our culture represented in the museum. I think we're in a time, people in the arts will know it's very difficult to get Arts Council funding for Muslim arts. This was actually Arts Council funded, although it went through about 3 different people before it came to us. But it makes it very hard for us sometimes when our arts are so, arts in the Muslim community are very spiritual. So it can be very hard sometimes for us to find the funding to really showcase the artistic talent within our communities and really allow others to be part of that. So it was brilliant to be able to do this. This was just a pilot, actually. It was just a pilot in Peterborough. So it was really good to be able to do this pilot. The results of this are actually going to be published in January, so of the intangible cultural heritage projects from across the country, at which point we're hoping we might get some more funding then to look at other ways in which Muslim song is developing in England, and hopefully we can look at other ways that we can help others allow others to share actually in the cultural heritage, not only that we've brought here, but that we are actively part of developing. You'll see why at the beginning now I said it's not just what we've brought here, but actually the fusion of these 3 musical types is an amazing way of reviving British heritage song too. So the fact that we are now as Muslims writing more and more British Muslim hymns is pretty amazing, given that this is a dying tradition actually amongst our counterparts of Christian heritage, and something that we can really share in and bring back to life. So I see this as exciting time actually, a time of revival, and and that there are other movements around the country. In London, actually, you see a big influence of the Caribbean Muslims on music too, and reviving certain types of music. So I'm very hopeful that there's more that we can do to kind of bring other people in on what's happening in our community, because it's almost like, I see it like, I see Muslim song like the chicken tikka masala of music, once upon a time that food was shunned, and now it's become part of the British mainstream, and chicken tikka masala is something that's a fusion of English food and the heritage that people of South Asian origin have brought, and I see that there's a lot happening around the heritage of different Muslim communities, and that fusion with traditional British song. I think it's a really, really exciting time for us. And that's it really. To conclude, I guess I should ask at this point, are there any questions?
Salawat. We have time for questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for a very enlightening lecture. So you talked about the 3 generations and how things, it's an evolution process, a trend process. So how do other artists, for example, Yusuf is not Sami Yusuf, kick into this, and how does Anushka Shankar, who's bringing the subcontinent culture and the fusion? She was at the proms, she was at the Glastonbury, and where are we in relation to them as well?
I mean, those are 2 really good examples, because those are people who are already being mainstream. So I think there's a growing appreciation for our musical heritage now, whether that's Anushka Shankar is somebody who can really talk about and really share something of the South Asian musical heritage. And we have we have at the South Bank every year now a festival which celebrates South Asian music. And sorry, who was the other artist you mentioned? Sami Yusuf. He's a really good example of Generation 3, even though he's not Generation 3, because, again, he's a master of all 3 scales. I think people like Sami Yusuf are an inspiration for the lesser artists amongst us, because he's, you listen to him, and you hear him operating in these 3 different scales. And he's a real inspiration. He's an amazing composer. I think he'll be even more appreciated through history. I don't know where he sits in terms of bridging gaps. And actually, I quite like to see that, because I know that for Sami Yusuf, that's something that's important to him, is kind of bridging the divide between cultures. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that, other than to say he's a really good inspiration for those of us who are doing music locally. He's a good reference point.
There's also cultural music. You talk about the Black Muslims in the Black History Month. Whole program on music in the black community. So there is that trend as well.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think for black music, I think black culture generally, I think is something that's incredibly important in the arts, because a lot of African heritage, so African Caribbean, African Americans, a lot of what they inherited musically is Muslim music too, and it's having your inspiration. These people, when they were brought as slaves, were Muslim, and the one thing that they could preserve of that heritage was their music. So I think there's, I think there's a lot of energy within that community now that they are able to be Muslim again, and there's a lot of sort of refinding their Islam, which allows them to be very energetic with music too. There's people like the Pearls of Islam, for example, who are really reviving. They're mixing Caribbean styles with Arab classic song, which is also an amazing fusion, and then turning things into English. So they now have the Rumi song. We got them recently to perform in Peterborough. For non-Muslims, and to bring them to really start to bring them into the song and the spirituality, without being ostensibly Muslim. So, there are some really exciting movements happening.
Yes, okay.
Alaikum, Anita.
Alaikum salam.
Well presented. It's one part of a big picture, isn't it? When you think about it, Because not recently, maybe 10 years ago, my kids went to a Naat and Nasheed program. I think it was in the Docklands, at the beginning of the Docklands this way. So there were a lot of these young singers who were kind of, so I look at them and I think like they're wannabes of British pop stars, right? But they want to keep within that Islamic tradition of not too much of the old banging and the old tambours, right? So they want to step away from full-on music as such, and they want to concentrate more on what they are saying. Now, when they come to that, it becomes Sufi music, does it not? When it's more about the words which are said, and you only need one item, as you said, one of those duffs or whatever, and the whole thing just flows. So how much influence does Sufi music still hold? And for example, if I was to bring a Sufi, I'm not talking about the king, Qawwali, I'm not talking about the king here, but anybody from Pakistan or India come here and he's a Sufi musician, come Qawwali, he's not going to recognize any of this, is he? So have we lost that completely? When you say fusion, yes, but then again, it's not fusion anymore. It's too much of a tailored event, a tailored effort for the masses here.
I think actually I would argue with that. I would say that you have two things going on. So you've always have mass pop culture, right? So we have the mass pop culture going on with, I'm actually not too into Muslim pop culture, so I'm going to get all the names wrong. There's Muslim Justin Bieber, whose name was Harris J. Is that who all the kids are? Harris J. You know, all these, who knows them all? Who knows Harris J, these guys, you know. So that there is that movement. When I was researching with the teenagers, that's who kept coming out. Was, Harris J, you know, and I was like, no, we're definitely not singing Harris J. So there is pop culture, but there's always been the sort of, I always see the pop culture almost like the Geats of old. Like, that's what everybody likes and everyone can sing. But I think there is this growing choral tradition, which is quite separate, which does define itself by, it's very knowledgeable, and it acknowledges the instruments it's using, the scales on which it's operating, the theory behind those scales. So these kids all know the theory behind the ragas. They know the theory behind the maqam that they're singing in. And now they're learning the English scales too. They're working out what they can do with that. They're learning different bits of... they're actually navigating the English scale through Christian music, which is really interesting because it attaches them to the local church heritage. So I actually think there are two different strands going on. And I think I would challenge you and say that even if the King of Qawwali or the Queen of Qawwali came here, which they do quite often, I think they would recognise this in those songs. We heard the second generation sing Tajdari Haram, which is really interesting because every generation I spoke to, I was like, what is the song, Tajdari Haram? Every generation. Because it's been revived by Atif Aslam. So I totally feel that actually these classical songs are being kept alive, and I do think there are traditions around the country which are reminding people where these come from. So yeah, I would challenge that.
It'd be nice to hear more from you. Maybe you have a website or something that we can, because you said there were a couple of things that I missed, and I thought that if we can do some homework on it and say, like especially the ones that you said were written by somebody in Cambridge.
Yes, actually, can we put up the last slide of my presentation? Oh, there we go. So if you go to that website, vivacitypeterborough.com, you'll see the museum content, which has got links to some of the other things. So yeah, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad is absolutely prolific in his writing, so it won't be hard to find. And I think I put Noor Yusuf in there as well. So.
And just a reminder, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad came here a couple of years ago, and he was talking about one of the things that he had done in this area. Iqbal?
Anita, thank you very much. I'm quite intrigued by this. I can see it in actually daily life, that the Asian heritage we somehow feel is lacking in Islam. So we go to this Middle Eastern heritage and come back. Now, when they come back, it's too early to see. But do they find that they need to go back to the Asian heritage to, fulfill their identity fully? Because that's where the whole, obviously, the tradition is shifting from one to the other, but it is quite an intriguing question.
Yeah.
Here on.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting question. I think so. I'm actually third generation. My family are Hindu Punjabi. I converted, so I kind of look at my friends who are second generation as a bit of an outsider. I see them going back and forth between these two places. I think my generation by now have realised that the whole going out to the Middle East thing wasn't really a way of finding themselves, but it was a way of finding something. And I think that the fact that they found something by visiting these very Sufi places and finding these tariqas and uncovering these gems made them come back and question what gems they've missed from the foreign culture they come from, if that makes sense. And so there's been a lot of looking back to what in our Mirpuri heritage or what in our Indian heritage is it that's special, that's spiritual? And I think that's been a strong part of holding on to those ragas, and now there's a more concerted effort to not lose the geets as well. So I think there was something of finding what's special by going abroad.
Have they started to go into English mystical music?
English mystical music. You know what? They haven't yet, but so my mother is actually the person teaching the English scale right now, and she's very much into English mystical music. So I might suggest that to her, because I'm sure they'd be very interested. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered, in the museum exhibition, if you could tell us about that. So, because you're talking about music, I guess audio presentations would be quite important rather than just photographs. And also about this museum exhibition, how much is contextualization important? Because you're coming from specific, the music you're presenting is from a specific tradition, so you can't speak for all Muslims. But
no, yeah, absolutely.
I wondered if that
came through. So you can actually see the museum content on the website. They've put it up there as well. There isn't any audio visual at the museum, sadly. They didn't have the budget for it in the pilot. I hope we'll get an installation later. So at the moment, it's literally 3 pieces of text, one about each generation, and we have a dolki in a cabinet and a duff in a cabinet, which is more than we had about Muslims before, but I'd love it to be something a bit more interesting, a bit more you can engage with a little bit more. In terms of contextualization, I've been very clear when I'm writing this up that this is that the Muslim community of Peterborough is mostly of Kashmiri origin, otherwise of East Africa. So we've got a map of where people have brought their traditions from. So it's very clear where the starting point is. And as a researcher, I will always contextualize things anyway. So when I was asked to do this for the Muslim community, I kind of set the definition of that. So in Peterborough, the majority of the Muslim community and the established Muslim community are either from East Africa, who came after Idi Amin, or they are from Mirpur, who came after the dam. So that was all in the 70s. So yes, that's been clear from my research and in the exhibition piece. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I had one quick question. You've talked about the relationship between the third generation and a rediscovery of the hymnal tradition, and this interplay between mosque and church via choir.
Mm.
If you go back 2 or 3 generations, people like Fairport Convention, Richard Thompson, they also form part of a hybrid. I guess Yusuf Islam also comes into it.
Mm.
What influence do you think that modern folk tradition has on this third generation?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I think that you've actually made me think of people like Marmaduke Pickthall even further back, who wrote the first hymns that we know of, Muslim hymns. And And I know that those figures loom large in the minds of people like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. I think that was his inspiration for starting to write hymns again. I think there was a move in, convert, if I can talk about convert song, British Muslim convert song, which moved towards more sort of, I guess, 1960s Church of England, Kumbaya type music. Which was fine, and Yusuf Islam is an example of that, but it was of its time. That's even dying out in the Church of England now. And at this point, I think there's a real harking back to the Victorian hymns, which have really seen the times. They've been around and will be around. And I think it's people like Abdullah Quilliam and Marmaduke Pickthall who sort of stay in the conscience of people who are writing, and Nur Yusuf as well, who are writing hymns now. It's in that style that they're being written. So Sheikh Abdul Hakim goes back to Celtic song, which was an influence on Christian song at that time, and then he overlays them with poetry that's either translated from Turkish or still in Turkish or in Arabic. I don't know how much the third generation are aware of that. I certainly think in my generation, especially in Peterborough, because we're so close to Cambridge, two of the choir masters that you saw at the beginning were both at Cambridge Muslim College with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. They'll be aware of that heritage, and keen to sing Sheikh Abdul Hakim's songs and have those popularised. The third generation, I'm not sure they're so aware of it yet, but they're certainly singing those songs. So it's a very roundabout answer.
What I was suggesting was, if you look back at what Fairport Convention and others were doing in the 60s and 70s, this exploration of what's happening in society and this ferment that's there, and comment on that, and then a reflection on how the personal journey, the spiritual journey relates to this. It's a different perception of the world. It's a different way of expressing yourself to the Victorian hymnal. Has that kind of commentary on what's happening around and seeing where we fit in as individuals and how that relates to us in our relationship with our Creator, has that impacted, if you like, on either the second or third generation in terms of content?
I don't know if I can answer that without thinking for a very long time. It's a very good question. Yeah. I'll be like Imam Malik and say I don't have an answer.
Thank you, by the way. Very, very interesting. I've got two very distinct questions. One is an observation, and see if you agree with this. It seems like the third generation, although there's obviously fusion, seems to have lost emotion in terms of its, adopting the current style or the native style of choral singing. But it seems to have, is that something that's, because that is very pertinent to the heritage, various heritage we've talked about. Is that an observation? Is that?
I mean, do you mean they've lost emotion in that they didn't sound very energetic in that song, or are you talking about when they sang in English, the emotion disappeared?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, no, that's part of the English song. That's it. That's
okay.
Part and parcel of it. Yeah,
okay.
That Victorian style of song is not very emotive, and the English scale the European scale is quite. It's quite functional in its being. I studied in that style. You're moving between octaves. You can make the notes louder or softer according to how you feel. That's down to the person who's playing. I mean, it's on the sheet music, but you can play with it a little bit. But the thinking behind the English music was really quite functional. It's that I need to be able to write something and for it to be relayed. And then composers, composers have emotion, but you have to be a real insider to understand that in English music. You have to be a real insider to the music that you're playing to understand what it's about. And an English choral hymn.
But it doesn't seem to have taken it from the fusion, and it seems to be not as engaging. So if things are passed on to generation,
things have to be engaging to be able to
Yeah.
last. And if it's a fusion, it doesn't feel like
They
that's...
quite like it, actually.
Yeah.
They really like
Okay.
the singing the English
Yeah.
style. It may also be that Sheikh Abdul Hakim's music that he's, because here they just sang Sheikh Abdul Hakim's, which is, as I said, it's in the Celtic style. I mean, you have amazing hymns in English as well. You know, you have. I'm trying to think of one now. So the Christmas carols. You know, a lot of the Christmas carols are very, very, very emotive, very difficult to sing as well. But yeah, that, I mean, it may be that they later come to that conclusion and start to develop English music that's a bit more energetic. But I mean, the fusion really is that they sing in 3 different styles at the moment. So they can sing in the Indian style, they can sing in the Arab style, and they can sing in the English style. The fusion isn't that those styles have merged, and maybe that's something that's coming. I think Sami Yusuf does that quite well.
No, he does, and that was a follow-on question from that. You touched on the taboo about music and you know, bringing music into mosques and stuff like that, which obviously is seen as a difficult thing in some places.
Yeah.
But music is quite important to be able to bring that, not just the instrument of the various drum, but piano, you know, flute, whatever the case may be, violin, whatever. How is that going to develop? Do you think that's something that we're going to move to as part of being part of this culture, or is that going to kind of be still a taboo?
I think I see that coming. That seems like the most obvious thing that's going to happen next. Because at the moment, what was really funny doing this research was that a lot of parents were taking their children to like covert kind of music lessons. So a lot of the kids are learning piano and guitar, but they were telling me like it's the biggest secret. But every parent said it to me, you know, my little one goes to piano, my little one goes to violin, but she don't say anything because it's a bit taboo. And even when I did the performance here, you know, the first 2 people wanted to play the harmonium, but they said, oh no, the Muslim community will frown on us if we do that. The 3rd generation, my mum who's teaching them now, she plays the piano with them. They all come and play the piano. Like they're learning in school. Like that's happening. It's happened already. And you know, I've already met a couple of young kids who are really good at composing. And at Soul Food, the organisation I run in Peterborough, we try and get people, we provide a stage for Muslims to be able to show that to other people. So we've got increasing numbers of Muslims coming now and singing or playing things that they've composed. So I think that's definitely coming. Just give them the space where it's accepted, and we'll thrive. And I think we really need to be aware that that's an important thing for us to do, is provide those spaces, you know.
We've seen, you know, you're talking about the kinds of instruments they might be allowed or not allowed, but we've seen use of Islam gradually going from not playing any kind of music to just stuff, and now guitar and other instruments. Sami Yusuf plays piano and includes many instruments, so they have influenced the new generation of Muslims on such kind of songs, and this is why you are finding that they are playing different instruments because they've seen such things. But you have also those who do not follow the tradition of classical Muslim scholars like Murad. I mean, for example, you have Sami Yusuf. Sorry, you have Saif Adam. He's got his own lyrics, his own music, and he sings, and he's becoming very popular. So you have people who are totally independent, having their own kind of music and lyrics and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, what you've pointed to is that there are also many different musical traditions that are developing, but which find their basis in spirituality, which is great, because there's never one way to connect with your spirituality, and the arts are an amazing way to connect with being, and there are many ways to do that even within the arts. So, yeah, I mean, for me it's an exciting time, because there are many different disciplines which are developing, which all take from other traditions, but also are proper to our time now in the West. So it's an exciting time.
So we looked at the last 50 years of this 3-generation fusion. So if you look at the next 50 years, it will all be British music, isn't it? Do we need to encourage our children, other than develop skills into the mainstream music abilities, if you like? Do we need to, I mean, from the Islamic perspective, is there a need to sort of separate it? Isn't it, I mean, music is music and talent is talent, and so it has to be part of the society that you live in. So just taking that further, if you actually say suddenly were given a huge grant by whichever body, maybe a commercial body, to say, look, this is the fund, whatever you require, develop Muslim children's skills and talents to produce something that is of commercial value. How would you go about it?
Gosh, well, I would first of all probably prefer the grant wasn't for something of commercial value, because that would undermine the quality of the music. But how would I go about it? I think, you know what, it's actually already happening. There are pockets of funders across the country who are putting money into this. And what they're doing is putting money into studios where people can record, listen to themselves, understand how to do overlays, be able to hear back. They're putting money into lessons in those studios as well, not only in how to play an instrument, but how to compose. And I think more of that would be great. I think, you know, one of the things that really, one of the thinkers, the Muslim thinkers who really inspires me in this area is Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, who he wrote a paper called Islam and the Cultural Imperative a few years ago. And he talks about the fact that, you know, he's a convert, he's an American convert, and he says, look, it's kind of, it's time for us to develop our own cultural expressions now of our spirituality, of our faith, because it's not only about us being comfortable where we are, but it's about us being able to build bridges and allow other people to share our experience, to share our spirituality. And those sharing spaces are in the arts, and they're in song, and they're in fine art, and they're in music. And I think that's really, really true. So I think for me, if I had more money like that, I would probably go completely local, look at what the dominant kind of types of music are in different areas, because they change according to which Muslim community is there. Look at what demographic is about them, and then invest in that kind of music. So in Peterborough, it's choir. Why? Because luckily, the heritage that has come from the South Asian communities, sort of classical kind of Qawwali type music, actually fits quite well in with the choral traditions. You know, it's performative as well, the choral traditions in Peterborough, and that's kind of a really good bridge to make, having performative classical arts. But if you're in another area, you might invest more in the Caribbean style music, which is a lot more about sort of coming together and everybody joins in. So that might work for London. So I'd really say you probably want to look at sort of, you know, what's going to bridge the cultural gaps in the local area, and what's the easiest way for us to express ourselves, the second and third generation Muslims. You know, what heritage do we have that we share with the people around us? So I think the answer to that is very local.
Final question.
Yay, the woman's question.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Really interesting, I guess, conversation that we're all having here today. I have a question on, do you know if, with globalization and, you know, the exploitation of Western civilization, all these issues that are happening in the world, do you know of any movements in Muslim countries or, you know, in other countries, not in necessarily what would categorize as the West, that are moving to express, I guess, Islamic feelings and spiritual things in a more Western way, or even in these sort of fusion of cultures, you know? I know of a rapper from South Africa that, you know, does, you know, some of his stuff is very Muslim and some of his stuff is not. So do you know of anything like that?
Yeah.
That you could share?
I think some of my favorite artists are like that. So I actually really like, I was sort of saying I don't like pop music. I really like hip hop. And actually in London we've got some amazing hip hop artists. We've got people like Muhammad Yahya, who's a convert. He used to be called Blind Alphabet. Now he is Native Son. So the person he sings with, she's actually, I think she's Christian, Serena. So they're pretty mainstream. Poetic Pilgrimage, again, you know, they're Muslims, but their subject matter isn't necessarily Islam. It's things that people can really come together around. So we've had Poetic Pilgrimage up to Peterborough to sing as part of Soul Food, because everyone relates to their subject matter. They mostly sing about being women, and they're really well known on the spoken word circuit. Who else do we have in that category? Boca Floya, who's over at the moment. He's a Mexican convert to Islam, so everything he sings is in Spanish. Again, it's about anything a Mexican could expect to encounter. But there's a kind of silent spirituality behind it, right? So there's a caring about world affairs. There is, you know, like Muhammad Yahya is a vegan, and he's a vegan in some of his songs. So he's like, I got my vegan thing in there, Maqdad. I heard you got meat-free Mondays didn't go down very well in Ramadan. Just like side note, I'm a vegan. But yeah, his song is sidetracked. He's very vocal about that sort of thing, about, you know, how did Rasulullah treat animals, you know, how should we treat them. Sakina Douglas and Munira Williams in Poetic Pilgrimage sing a lot about, you know, how women are treated, should be treated. They tell the stories of women who've been mistreated, and they have a moral in their story. There's no swearing in their music. There's no dissing anyone. You know, it's all very Islamic when you think about it, but the subject matter isn't. And these are great artists because anyone can unite around them. And they're great representatives, actually, of Muslims. And it's a great way to... This is actually, for me, these are the people who are really culturally sharing what we are. You know, they're sharing through a form that everyone can relate to. So I think, yeah, there are definitely artists like that in these countries. Those are the two I think of straight off my head, but there are many more.
There are about 3 more questions that people have raised, but given the discussion about veganism, I think we have to stop there. She is around for a few minutes afterwards, maybe if you have some questions and you can ask. So let's end the salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.